Hi there, and today we're going to look at herbs and spices. Now you should know what herbs and spices are, but if you don't, you will by the end of this lesson. So what is so special about herbs? Why and how should they be used? After this lesson, you'll be able to identify where specific herbs originated and what type of food they're best used with. You'll be able to develop a basic understanding of how to properly store fresh and dry herbs. Okay? So, is it an herb or is it a spice? That's a good question. Herbs are green leaves of a plant, the flower of a plant, or the stem of a plant. Okay, they can be used fresh or dried, and they add flavor and aroma or even medicinal properties. Okay, herbs need to be grown in moderate climates. What that means is it's not grown in the desert necessarily or in places that are very cold. It has to be in a place with a moderate climate. And they're more subtle in flavor generally than spices. Spices tend to be much stronger in flavor, and it's because of what they're made out of. Spices, on the other hand, you can see some spices here, and they're all kind of neat looking. Some look like seeds. A lot of them are seeds. Some are ground, some are not. So spices are made from roots, seeds, fruits, flowers, or bark, and they're used for similar purposes to flavor foods. They're usually kind of earthy in color. Now these are grown in tropical climates, and they're generally more pungent, that means more strong, in flavor or aroma. So tropical climates, that's near the equator. So really we're looking at South America. Mexico is along the equator on our hemisphere, or parts of Africa and Southeast Asia. The equator is the hottest part of the planet. Okay? So now for the origins of some of the herbs and spices. Now, back when people first started using herbs and spices, at least in Europe, they needed to get their hands on these herbs and spices, and guess what? They were not nearby. They had to go to Southeast Asia to get them, and then some of them actually came from the New World. After the explorers and the colonizers came from Europe, they used to call North and South America here, they used to call it the New World. So they went to the New World and they brought back these particular things. Now, annatto would be brought back from Mexico by the conquistadors probably, and the Chiles too. Paprika, allspice. All of these things were brought back from North and South America by European explorers. Okay, and we still use all of those things. Now, in Europe, and here's Europe on the map, okay, it's above Africa and next to Asia in the same continent, connected continents there. The herbs and spices that come from Europe are bay leaves. Maybe you've seen your parents cooking something and they put these weird dried leaves in it. Those are bay leaves. Chives are little thin grass-like plant that tastes like onions. Okay, it's more delicate than onions. Dill up here is a feathery, kind of fresh smelling, citrusy type herb. Okay. Oregano is right here, and everyone's kind of familiar with oregano. That's famous in a lot of different cooking. Hang on, my cat's about to knock something off the table. Okay, where was I? Oregano. Oregano is famous in Italian cooking, Mediterranean cooking, and even in Mexican cooking, there's a lot of oregano. Parsley. Parsley doesn't have a strong flavor. It's more for decoration and things like that, but it's very nutritious. Sage over here. Sage is the kind of flavor that you associate with turkey, like the smell of Thanksgiving stuffing or something on Thanksgiving. Sage is one of those aromas. So is rosemary. Rosemary is also used for poultry like chicken, for other birds that we eat. And for meat, it's really good on meat. The rosemary, it smells like a pine tree. So maybe you've seen it, I think in some parking lots in the area, like if you go to Ralph's, they have rosemary growing in the parking lot. So keep your eye out and maybe you can pinch a piece off and smell it. It's going to smell like a pine tree. Okay. Now tarragon is a famous herb. It's very popular in France. It smells a little bit like licorice, or anise is a more subtle aroma than licorice, but they smell similar. Okay, but it's a very fine, very delicate herb, big in French cooking. And then thyme over here, it's Thyme, but it sounds like it should say thyme, but it's really thyme. The th is a t sound. The thyme is big in French cooking, European, Italian cooking, and things like that. Okay, so Europe continued. These are some spices and herbs from Europe. Caraway seeds. Caraway seeds are the smell. If you ever have rye bread is seasoned with caraway seeds, and that's the smell of rye bread. Fennel. Fennel has a light licoricey flavor as well, anise flavored, and that's used in cooking. And there's also seeds that are used. When you eat Italian sausage, there are little seeds in it, and those are fennel, and they have a kind of a licorice flavor. Maybe pepperoni too would have that. So lavender. Lavender's a flower. They use it for air fresheners and things, but they do flavor teas and desserts and other things with it, and we'll make some lavender syrup with that. Mint, self-explanatory there. Mint smells like toothpaste, like a breath mint. There's different types of mint, but it's very popular. Chamomile is a flower that's an herb, technically, and that's more medicinal, and people drink chamomile tea. It's supposed to help you go to sleep. Savory is an herb that people don't use as much as the other big ones. The big ones like oregano, basil, thyme. Savory, you don't see it very often, but it's also an herb people use. Now, in India, and here it is on the map, kind of in the Indian Ocean around here. And this is where the spice routes, the ships used to sail to Europe, used to go around Africa and back up to Europe, and they'd have to sail all that way to go to the Spice Islands, which were here. Now, remember, Columbus went the other way. He wanted to go that way to hit the Spice Islands, but they ran into North America and South America. So they didn't make it that way. They didn't make it there. Now, basil is famous. You probably are all familiar with basil. It's the big flavor from Italian sauce and Italian cooking. It is used in Thai cooking and things like that. And you'll recognize it if you smell it. If you're not exactly sure about it right now, you'll recognize it when you smell it. Cardamom is an interesting spice. These are pods that have little tiny seeds, and when they use them, they'll either throw the pod into the cooking, but you don't really eat the pod. You need to take it out or not eat it. But ground cardamom is fine, and ground cardamom has kind of a lemony taste, very strong, fresh, minty, lemony flavor. Peppercorns. Peppercorns is pepper, black pepper. When you grind black pepper on food, or you have salt and pepper, this is it right here. Turmeric. Turmeric is actually a root of a plant, and then they dry that root, and then they grind it into a powder. And that's medicinal, but it's also used in curry and other spice combinations. Nutmeg is what they grind on top of desserts and cappuccinos and things like that. There's nutmeg. Mace is when you break off this outer coating underneath, there's this is inside, and this is called mace, and that's nutmeg, but they're the same thing. This is the inside of that, but they have different flavors, and they're both used in cooking. And then there's cinnamon. Cinnamon is a tree bark, which is kind of interesting. You usually sprinkle ground cinnamon on things. Sometimes people drop a cinnamon stick into a drink, and that's kind of cool. But cinnamon is the bark of a tree. Okay. So now in the Far East is China, Japan, Southeast Asia. It's over here. Now this is a curry dish, probably from India or Thailand or something. And a curry is a spice mixture that has like about 6 or 7 different kinds of spices in it. Okay, it's a spice blend. Now, garlic is a big aromatic. It's considered an herb, and that's used in cooking. Juniper berries are a little bit more obscure. You probably have never had anything with juniper berry, but they use it for venison, cooking venison. They also use it to make different liqueurs and things like that. Cilantro, I'm sure we all know what cilantro is. It's one of my favorites. Unfortunately, some people have a gene in their taste buds that it might make cilantro taste like soap. And if you're one of those unfortunate people, you probably hate cilantro because you think the flavor's terrible, it tastes like soap, but that's genetic. Sorry about that. Lemongrass. Lemongrass, it tastes like lemon, smells like lemon. That's used in Thai cooking and Thai food, things like that. Star anise. Now guess what? That's that licorice flavor that I talked about before. I said it was anise flavored, so fennel smells like anise, and so does tarragon. They all have similar flavors. That's interesting. Cloves, on the other hand, cloves have a very pungent, kind of a little bit like cinnamon, but stronger, and a little bit of wintergreen flavor. Clove oil kind of gives a little burning warmth when you have cloves in food. Okay, they put it in drinks and things. Okay, so ginger. Ginger is another root. Now it's used fresh and it could be used dried, but it's a lot better fresh. It's grated with a grater and put in stir fries and soups and things like that. Galangal is similar to ginger, not quite as strong smelling, but it's used a lot like they use ginger. And then here's chives again. Chives are great. I always want to grow chives, but they're hard for me to grow for some reason. So now, if you're going to cook with herbs, some herbs are called fine and some are called robust. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Fine versus robust. Well, robust herbs are added to food while it's being cooked. Okay, now these are strong herbs like rosemary. Rosemary is more like a tree branch than a little plant, so it's very tough, and you can cook it for a long time. Some herbs have a very subtle flavor. Fine herbs, they have such a subtle flavor, and the plants themselves are so delicate that if you cook them, it just ruins them. Does that make sense? The flavor is so subtle and their plants are so delicate that if you threw it in boiling soup or something, it would just ruin them. So fine herbs, ones that are very delicate, plants, delicate flavors and delicate plants, you actually sprinkle them on at the very end before you eat it. Okay, the robust herbs like sage, thyme, oregano, rosemary, those you can throw in and add to food while it's being cooked, and they'll still have flavor at the end. But fine herbs you really have to put on at the end, at the last second, or just before you eat it, or you eat them just raw in a salad. Okay, so that's the difference between fine or robust herbs. Now, if you're going to cook with herbs, it's always better to have fresh herbs. Okay, they taste better, it looks better, it's a better thing. The reason why you would use dried herbs is because you didn't have any fresh herbs. You know what I mean? So drying is going to cause the loss of some essential oils and flavors. Even under the best conditions, if you're the best at drying herbs, you're still going to lose a lot of flavor and aroma by drying out those herbs. So do your best to always use fresh herbs. It's okay if you have to use dry if that's all you have. Now, sometimes there's different ethnic herb assortments. These are things that go together. They're famous in the cuisine of that country that we're talking about. For example, Italy. Okay, Italian food's great. Common herb assortments that would make something Italian is basil, oregano, fennel. Remember, that's the one that smells like anise. Flat leaf parsley and garlic, lots of garlic. Those are all herbs and spices that are typically Italian. Now you can understand too that here's a typical Mexican combination. Cilantro and coriander, basil is used, tomatillo, and lots of chili peppers. Okay, those those you're going to find all throughout Mexican cuisine. And we could go through every country on the planet and we could probably name some different herb combinations, herb assortments that are typical of that country. Okay, now let's just say you're making a recipe and it calls for 1 tablespoon of fresh cut basil. Okay, but you don't have any fresh cut basil. But you do have dried basil in the spice cabinet. So is it the same amount? Would it be 1 tablespoon of dried? No, because the dried ones, you're going to be able to pack more dry leaf into the spoon than you would fresh. So trust me here, you would use more fresh herbs and you would use less dried herbs. So if you needed to use dried basil instead of regular basil, you'd only use 1 teaspoon instead of 1 tablespoon. Okay. Now, sometimes the dried herbs are ground, and if they're ground, well, guess what? Even more ground herb will fit into that spoon. So you have to use less. You'd use like 1/4 or 1/2 teaspoon. And those are the smallest measuring spoons that you have at your house, right? This one right here is 1/4 and this one is 1/2. Super small, okay? So you don't use much. Here's another way you can cook with herbs. You can place herbs and spices in oil and you can let the flavor infuse into the oil and then you use that oil for cooking. And that's really cool. That's another way that people used to preserve herbs for the winter time, is to flavor oil with the herbs and then use that oil to season things. Okay. Now you can also make marinades and sauces for meat, poultry, or fish. You've probably seen meat that's all covered with herbs like this. It's marinating, right? And rosemary is good on that. Garlic is really good. Black pepper, other spices and herbs. Another thing you can do is you can make herb butter or cheese or use it for stuffing. You can use it for to put on baked potatoes or on vegetables. So you just take your fresh herbs and you chop them up and immediately you combine them with softened butter. You know, you have to let the butter sit out until it's really soft and squishy. But then you blend the herbs back into the butter and then you seal up the butter into a tube like in plastic wrap and you put it in the freezer and you can save it forever. And every time you take a piece of this herb butter off and put it on something, when it melts, it looks like you just used fresh herbs. And we'll do that in school sometime. So now there's a wide variety of herbal teas that people like to drink, and you know, maybe you already drink them at home. Maybe you make chamomile tea or you make mint tea. Maybe some of these teas that you buy at some of these expensive tea stores like Tivana, you could get a whole cup of mixture of herbal teas that doesn't even have any actual tea in it, because tea is a specific plant, but herbal teas are just the herbs. Okay, so that's a big way that we use herbs and flowers. Now you can use it as a garnish or eat it fresh. This you see a lot, and if you go out to a restaurant, see this basil on top of this? That's a garnish. Okay, it looks pretty, it looks cool. Little cilantro on this right here, looking good. Makes a garnish. Parsley chopped and sprinkled on something. Those are garnishes. Okay. Now, more delicate fresh herbs. Remember we said that there were fine and robust herbs. These would be the fine herbs. You add them a minute or two just before the ending, or you sprinkle it on the food just before you serve it. Basil, chives, cilantro, dill leaves, these are all very delicate. Well, cilantro is a little bit stronger, but if you really want to taste it, you put it on at the end. Now, less delicate fresh herbs like rosemary and thyme, and this is rosemary and thyme right here. You can see they're not delicate leaves like basil is. You can add them in the last 20 minutes of cooking and they'll be fine. You'll still taste it. They'll still be in there. They won't disappear. Now, these bay leaves that people put in there, maybe if you see this picture you recognize what a bay leaf looks like. You have to take them out. After you're done cooking, you have to take it out because people will hurt themselves. They're very sharp, dried leaves. So if you're going to use a bay leaf, if you need to tie it together in an herb packet or something, just make sure you get it out of that food before you serve it. Now, there are some guidelines for storing your spices and herbs to maintain the quality. And what you need to do is you need to protect the flavor and color of dried herbs. You would protect them from moisture, humidity and moisture, light, okay, sunlight or just light in general, heat. Heat will ruin the flavor and color of dried herbs, and air. Okay, they shouldn't be exposed. They should be in an airtight container, in a jar or some kind of container that you can seal. They should be in the dark. They should be away from heat, and they should be away from moisture. So you're going to store them in a dark place like your cupboard or drawer or something, in a nice tightly sealed container. Now, if you have a spice rack like this, you don't want to store them above a dishwasher or a microwave or over the stove or the refrigerator or a sink or a heating vent, because that's where you're going to get the heat and the moisture and things like that. Now, if you store it in an open spice rack, put it in the cupboard or somewhere dark. Now, storing fresh herbs is different. Now, if you take fresh herbs and you chop them up and you put them in an ice cube tray with olive oil, maybe you fill the ice cube tray with olive oil and you sprinkle all the fresh herbs inside there. Well, they're going to freeze and look like this. That's frozen olive oil with fresh herbs in it. And here again, when you melt that, it's going to look like they're brand new. And it's a great way to do it. Now, if you bought fresh herbs and you're going to use them pretty soon, but you want them to be nice, then you just cut off the little bottom, cut off a tiny part of the bottom, like you're putting fresh flowers in a vase, and then you put them in a little cup or jar with water, and you put it in the refrigerator. It's going to stay fresh like a plant, like you have fresh cut flowers. So the same thing. You put them in a little vase and put them in the refrigerator. Now, if you can have an herb garden, see these little planter boxes? You don't have to have a farm to be able to have an herb garden. If you can get a few plants going, it's a great way to have them around when you need them, because you only need a few pinches, mostly, and then you can just keep growing them and you can use them whenever you need them. You might do them in separate pots like this. This little herb garden would be enough to give you fresh herbs for whatever you're making. Okay, so in conclusion, herbs and spices are very versatile plant products that can be used in a variety of ways. Now you've learned about some different herbs and spices. Go look in your spice cabinet. Smell some of these different spices and see if they smell like you think they would.